Hello and welcome to week 20 of A Year of an Indie Writer. Well, I hope you had a good week. Mine was pretty good. And it's Friday afternoon for me, so it is quitting time. So I have actually had a chance to enjoy this week's beverage. It is the drive-through red ale. It is quite a good one. I enjoy it quite a bit. Love the label, love the color, the vibe of just what this label represents. It is bottled by the Joseph Brow Brewing Company in California. So if you have a chance to try that, I recommend it. Well, we had a big deal here at the Parker house this week. My son graduated from high school. Well, no, he finished his last day of high school. Graduation is still actually a month away because of the virus. They are moving it to late June. But as of this past Wednesday, my son attended his last class. It was online because that's where we are now. But for you parents out there who have already passed this milestone, it is, I'm not sure what word it is. I'm supposed to be a writer and supposed to be able to string words together. But when you sit there and you actually contemplate the fact that your son who you saw born is now complete with high school, it's a very unique feeling. It's partially bittersweet, lots of proudness, excitement, just the gravity and the weight and the major milestone effects of your child graduating from high school. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it's one when your kid is born, you project certain things on that child's life, and some come true, most of them don't, because the child is not you, and you're officially actually projecting your own beliefs and desires and whims and that kind of thing onto your child, and that's not their life. So when the child finally gets around to graduating from high school, it is a wonderful thing. And I marked the day and I teared up only a couple of times throughout the day. So I think you parents who have already experienced it know what I'm talking about. And for you parents out there who have yet to experience it, it is a truly wonderful, bittersweet, wonderful, awesome thing to behold. So on behalf of my family, who has a senior graduating during this COVID-19 time, I hope for those of you out there watching who have a senior, high school senior in particular, but college senior also, graduating this year, just make it as exciting as you possibly can, because it is truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Writing-wise this week, two things. One's a quote, and one is a lesson learned, not a lesson learned, but kind of a always be learning type of thing. Let me do the quote first, in case my phone doesn't time out or whatever. So one of my favorite websites is called ultimateclassicrock.com. I'm a 51-year-old man, so most of the bands that I have liked all my life, they're old, they're officially classic rock. So like the Foo Fighters somehow are now classic rock because a band's been around for 25 years. That's the 1990s, so they become classic rock now. Anyway, there was an article talking about how Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, a former drummer of Nirvana, was humiliated by Bruce Springsteen. Now, when you say humiliated, you tend to actively think that Bruce Springsteen did something to David Grohl. That's not necessarily the case. But Dave Grohl was talking about one of the times that Springsteen showed up to a Foo Fighters show. He was actually there, Springsteen was, to see the opening act. And when Grohl found that out pre-show, he was kind of bummed. He used the word humiliated. I'm not sure that's the right word, but it was just kind of like, oh, so you're here for the other guys. Whatever. But after the show, Springsteen came backstage and complimented Dave and the rest of the band about how good the show was. And two things. One, Grohl said to Springsteen, "Hey, where'd you sit?" Springsteen was like, I sat in the audience just like everybody else does. And Grohl really appreciated that little bit of humility on the Bruce Springsteen's level. Hang on, I gotta do my notes real quick. Okay, sorry about that. Now, anyway, he really appreciated Springsteen being humble enough to not get some sort of fancy backstage or up front seat. He just was sat out in the audience like everybody else. But Springsteen wrote him a letter a few days later, and it included a quote that I actually have on my quotes on writing file. Do you have a quotes on writing file? You know, I use, let's see if it's no, it's not gonna come through. Oh well. I use the Simple Note app, and I literally keep a running list of just various quotes on writing that I use to, you know, help myself get through some, you know, down times, or like, why am I doing this times, or, you know, things like that. Just get you back on track. And this one I found to be very interesting. And I'm going to go ahead and read the whole quote from the larger article. I'll put the link of the article in the show notes. So it says, the Foo Fighters frontman received a handwritten letter from Springsteen a few days later that he said explained this very clearly. This is Springsteen's quote. Quote, "When you look out at the audience, you should see yourself in them, just as they should see themselves in you." Now, granted, this is a musician talking to a musician, but I think it applies to every creative out there, whether you're a musician, a writer, an artist, a pottery person, a theater writer, a performer, a comedian, you name it. I think any creative can substitute this. So, which got me to thinking, when I sit and write my stories, what do I envision? Well, I'm the first reader of my stories. So I want to be entertained. That's a given. But how often do you think of some reader who will pick up your book, whether on a Kindle or a Kobo or a paperback copy, and be reading in his or her own chair in a study or a library or on the beach or on a deck? How often do you actually imagine them reading your story? I'll admit that I do think of them sometimes. Again, I'm the first reader of the story I'm writing, so I want to entertain myself. So I know where I am. I'm sitting at 5 o'clock in the morning writing different chapters, but I do have the reader in mind, and I want to always be sure to have the reader in mind, because I want to write a story that entertains me, and I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people who like the things I like out there. So do you keep the reader in mind? And if you don't, you probably should. Anyway, that's the first the writing lesson that I have for today. The second one is the idea of, do you always stay in a learning environment? Do you always keep learning your craft? I do. Early this week, I listened to, it was actually last Saturday, I listened to a podcast by Joanna Penn, who hosts a podcast called The Creative Penn. I will put a link in the show notes. It is an excellent podcast. It's been going on for 8 years now, I guess, maybe longer. And in terms of going to indie school, you could almost just listen to her podcast, read her books, and have an education of what it means and what it takes to be an independent author. I've been listening to her for 6 years now, and I have learned a ton. This most recent episode was with an author whose name is Larry Brooks. Now, he has written a book called Story Engineering, I believe it's called, and I have it. It's in one of my writing boxes. But he was talking on her most recent episode about a book called Great Stories Don't Write Themselves. And I loved the interview so much that I went out and purchased paper copy. I keep a paper copy for stuff like this. This is like a textbook for me. Now, when he's going through on the interview, and he's going through many of his ideas and his concepts, I'm not a beginning writer. This is partly for a beginning writer, partly, but it is also, I have already learned things in the first 37 pages then it just helps to clarify things. And speaking of reading for information, do you read with a pencil or a pen? I do that frequently, and I constantly underline things. I don't know if y'all can see that or not. Underline things, and I actually make notes along the way of anything I'm reading for education. And then at the end of reading a book like this, what I end up doing is I actually create a Word file with all the notes that I've taken. Now I do that using the Dragon software dictation system, so I don't actually have to literally type all these notes out. I just get to speak them. But I was wondering, do y'all keep learning your craft? Do you keep just hearing how other people do the thing that we do? I find that constantly to be a great educational experience, something that sometimes you're going to nod your head and go, yeah, I do that. And then every now and then you're going to go, hey, well, that's something. I never thought of it that way before. And it actually can change the way you work, change the way you write. I do that frequently with podcasts and articles from different writers and professional writers and bloggers, and of course in books. So, like I said, I am 37 pages into this. I'm on chapter 4. It's called The Sound of the Writing Conversation. And I have already gleaned a few fun nuggets from the first few chapters. The subtitle is Criteria-Driven Strategies for More Effective Fiction. And I think the basic gist, based on the podcast interview and from what I've read on the back cover, is there are certain criteria that all good and great stories possess, the ones that we remember, the one that took certain authors to the next level. In fact, already he has name-dropped Dan Brown and Dennis Lehane, and ironically, I latched on to both of those authors because of their respective breakout books. Well, no quotes needed because they are the breakout books. Never heard of Dan Brown until Da Vinci Code. Love the Da Vinci Code, love the way it's structured, love the thrill ride. Perfect for exactly what it is. Dennis Lehane, never heard of him in 2001 until Mystic River came out. And I heard an article, an article on NPR, an audio interview with him, and went out and bought the book. Have read that book 2 or 3 times now. Love it. Then I went back and read most of the earlier Dennis Lehane stories with the PI characters. Have not gone back and read anything Dan Brown related scam likely on the call. Anything else Dan Brown related other than, the heck's his name? Right now, you watching this, you're going to go, oh, it's Robert Langdon. That's it, Robert Langdon. So I was going to say Tom Hanks, but that's not it either. I've only read the Langdon books, but the point I'm making is that so far Brooks has commented that the premise of each of those books was unique. That was the breakout book for each of these authors, and it took them to the next level. And I have already learned some things from this book, so I'm going to give this a preliminary recommendation that this is a good book to purchase, and maybe it can help you. Maybe it'll be a book of a bunch of stuff that you already know. I don't know, but when I do finish the book, I will give it a good and thorough review. That's it for this week. It is yet another week in this COVID-19 crisis, just the ongoing stay-at-home orders. So I hope everybody is safe. Hope everybody's having some good books to read, good movies to watch, good music to listen to, and I hope you all stay safe. Until next week, this is Scott Parker saying so long. Goodbye.